This video will show you how to factor by grouping. Factor by grouping is a technique we use when we have four terms. What we want to do is do exactly what the title says, and that is group these together. Take these two together, take these two together. And then all you're going to do is look for the greatest common factor for those two terms. The GCF for those two terms is x squared. And when you divide out that x squared, you're going to be left with the binomial x plus 2. If you saw the video on taking out the GCF, an option, once you decide what the GCF is to write the GCF underneath each of those terms just to make the division a little bit easier. This shows you why this is x, because the exponent law says keep the base and subtract. This, the x squareds cancel. When you look here, the GCF is just the number 5. If you divide each of those by 5, you're going to get x plus 2. What makes this technique work is that when you're finished with that step, you're going to have a binomial that is the same in both parentheses. What we're going to do now is pull that binomial out front, and then what's left, if I pulled out that x plus 2, which is in common, what's left is that coefficient and that coefficient. And those are the two terms that go in the next parentheses. Remember that factoring is just the opposite of multiplying. So I can check this factoring answer by multiplying it back using FOIL, and I should get this polynomial. So x times x squared, there's my x cubed. X times 5 is the 5x. 2 times x squared, there's your 2x squared, and 2 times 5 gives you 10. So this is the correct factoring for that polynomial. If what's inside the parentheses here is not the same, that says you cannot continue. X cubed plus 4x squared plus 3x plus 12, group 2 and 2. Take these two together. The GCF between here and here is x squared. And if you divide x squared into each of those, you get x plus 4. Here, the GCF is 3. If you write down that 3 and divide both of those by 3, you get x plus 4. So here we see it's the same thing in the parentheses. So I'm going to pull that x plus 4 out front because it's a common factor. And then what's left then is x squared plus 3. Another way to think about this, rather than thinking about what's left, is what I said to you earlier, and that is divide. The common factor is x plus 4, so I can divide this by x plus 4. I can divide this by x plus 4. And what happens is x plus 4 cancels, and we're left with x squared. X plus 4 cancels, and we're left with the 3. So you can think about it that way also. I think it's just as easy to think about the x plus 4 being pulled out front, and once it's pulled, what's left is x squared plus 3. There's a little twist to this problem right here. We're going to look like we did a minute ago. We're going to take out the GCF here, which is x. When you divide both of those by x, and you don't have to do this step right here. It depends on what you need. If it helps you, go ahead and write that division down. X is cancel gives you y, x is cancel gives you 2. You look at these two and you think there is no common factor, and you're right, but what we need is to think about the common factor being 1, because we need kind of a placeholder there. So we're going to factor a 1 out of here, which leaves it as y plus 2. So now we have our y plus 2 being the same in both parts. We're going to pull that out front, and then once I pull that out front, what's left is the x plus 1 going in the other parenthesis. And on any of these, you can convince yourself that this is right by actually multiplying this together, and you should get the original problem. Sometimes there's a minus in between, and there's something we need to be careful of with that minus. We start out the same way. The common factor between the first two terms is x squared. And if you need to, divide the x squared by both of those, and you will see that you're going to get 2x minus 1. If there is a minus right here, the minus that's right smack in the middle needs to come down, and that means we're really factoring out a negative value. The common factor between 10x and 5 is 5. So I'm going to factor a 5 out of here, which really means I'm going to put a negative 5 underneath each one. A negative 5, a negative 10 divided by negative 5 actually turns this into a positive 2x. And a positive 5 divided by negative 5 is a negative 1. So there it is, nicely typed up. And where we were before, 2x minus 1, 2x minus 1. Bring that out front. And then what you have is x squared minus 5. Be sure you bring the sign with the 5. Multiply that up, and you will get the original polynomial. Let's look at another one with a negative. Look at these two. Then we're going to look at these two. Looking here, there is no numerical common factor, but notice you do have an m in both terms. So m is the greatest common factor. Divide both those by m, and you will get that binomial. Bring your minus down. And then there is no other common factor. When you're down to this step, looking at the last two terms, and there is no common factor, you have to think about pulling out a negative 1. So I'm going to put negative 1 underneath each of these terms so that I get my sign right. A negative 6 divided by negative 1 is a positive 6m. And a positive 5n divided by negative 1 is a negative 5n. Notice that gives me the correct binomial so that I'm going to be able to continue this. There's your 6m minus 5n. That's the same binomial. I pull it out front. And what you have then is m minus 1 in the other parenthesis. So that's your factor by grouping. It's just based on using your greatest common factor twice in each problem.